Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to be talking about Blizzard's latest round of class changes in Dragonflight. I've been super busy with updating the Wowhead guides for Protection Warriors and Brewmaster Monks over the last couple of days, along with getting ready for the big Vault of the Incarnates race starting on Tuesday of the next week. So I wasn't sure I would have time to make a video about this, but thankfully I managed to squeeze it in between farming rare mobs for item upgrades that they don't ever feel like dropping. So at the start of the weekend, Blizzard unveiled a pretty huge set of nerfs directed at tanks, and I'll start out by reading the blue post, then I'll go over the impact it's going to have on tanks and tank balance, and wrap up with how I think tanks are going to be shaking out for Season 1 of Mythic Plus and the first raid tier. Before I start, let me say that Blizzard has received a ton of negative feedback for this change, so maybe they'll backpedal it a little bit or kind of soften it up some, or just do something smarter and make more targeted corrections to class balance. But my little preamble here is that these changes are kind of dumb. They also won't go live until the weekly maintenance occurs in a few days on Tuesday in the US and Wednesday in the EU. Okay, here's the post. This change is as follows. Here we go. We've been taking a long look at tank survivability as we prepare for the beginning of Dragonflight Season 1. In general, we found that the new talent trees have introduced a lot of power across all classes and specializations. Talents that were once exclusive through systems like the talent roads, legendaries, or covenants can now be equipped at the same time. Through our recent testing, we've determined that the damage done to tanks needs to be increased. This is probably true, or definitely true. While we're thrilled that players are enjoying playing tanks in Dragonflight and we want the role to be healthy, there are some negative effects that can come from tanks being too strong that we want to avoid. We want healers to play a key role in keeping tanks alive, and tanks shouldn't be able to easily solo large portions of encounters after the rest of the group has died. We're adjusting the damage reduction passives on all of the tanks, effectively increasing the damage tanks take by 10%. We think tanks will still feel powerful after this change, and it will result in a more balanced gameplay experience for all players. Now I'll scroll down the screen a bit here and put all the respective tank nerfs that I can on the screen at once, but they're all relatively similar. There we are. For the most part, this is just Blizzard choosing to remove the 10% damage reduction passives from all the tank specs. You know, blood fortification no longer reduces damage taken, was 10%. This is technically an 11.1% damage taken increase for all tanks, not the 10% that Blizzard said. That's sort of a dumb, nerdy nitpick, but whatever. I couldn't let it go. There are a few specs that are a bit more unfairly targeted by this nerf, and I kind of want to focus in on those first. Demon Hunter, first off, gets a 12.5% damage taken increase rather than the 11.1% nerf that everybody else is getting, because they go from 20% damage taken or damage reduction down to 10%. I don't think that extra 1.5% damage taken is going to really matter for Demon Hunters, but it is more than any other tank is getting. Now let me also scroll down a bit here to point out this other set of changes that are happening to Demon Hunter here. Blizzard has targeted another set of nerfs at Demon Hunters, and once again blamed them on Havoc, as you can see here. A number of changes below are targeted at reducing the passive healing provided to several DPS specs. That's true, but Vengeance Demon Hunter just kind of got lumped in there as well. Here it is. Vengeance Demon Hunters lost self-healing from the Hunt's Leech effect, which has been severely nerfed, down from 50% leech for 30 seconds to 20% leech for 20 seconds. Huge nerf. Charred Warblades also only grants 3% healing from all fire damage, down from 5%. That's also a noticeable little nerf. Is Vengeance being punished because Havoc is too good? I would say yes. I still think Vengeance Demon Hunter's in great shape. They're doing well, but Blizzard is chipping away at pieces of the class here and there. They're the only tank to get any extra attention here. Like, all the rest of this is Priest, Rogue, Warlock, Fury Warrior. Whatever, I don't love to see Demon Hunter continually getting nerfed here, but I don't think this will add up to too much or really like affect their balance in a meaningful way. It's just kind of a little bit of a bummer. Next is Monks. Obviously, monks are getting the same as everybody else, you know, losing their 10% damage reduction passive. They're not getting a larger percentage nerf than any other tanks, but they are the tank that already takes the most damage and by a significant margin. Twitter's been full of people dunking on monks. I mean, I've even taken the opportunity to get some shots in myself, because throwing the same nerf at monks as they're throwing at like bear druids is kind of a joke. It just doesn't really make any sense at all. Monk takes the most damage of any tank. It needs the most healing of any tank. It's not close on either front, not remotely close. Just to put it into context, during raid testing, we got to retest the same bosses on the same difficulty a couple of times. And I got to play my warrior in one test and my monk in another, just for a little apples to apples comparison. I also did Mythic Plus and a bunch of solo Mythic Zero pulls, you know, where I was doing kind of some limit testing just to make comparisons, but the logs from raids were extremely valuable. My monk needed 5 times as much external healing as my warrior. 500% more healing required to stay alive on a monk than a warrior. That's always kind of been the case. That's not some new revelation that monk needs more healing, but the degree to which monk needed so much more external healing to stay alive than a warrior or any other tank, you know, demon hunter, the same deal. Like, that's quite eye-popping. Now, like I said, there's been a lot of dunking on monks, and rightly so. I think they're back to being in a pretty bad spot for Mythic Plus with this change. I still think their toolkit makes them excellent in raids, but I can't deny they're going to be the worst Mythic Plus tank in Season 1 at the current state of affairs if this change goes through and nothing else happens. I also want to point out blood DKs, because I feel that they have flown under the radar when it comes to people joking about tanks, and I think they're also in real danger because of this nerf. Now, Blood DK is a bit of a weird tank because it basically doesn't care how much damage it takes as long as it stays alive, because it's able to heal all that damage that comes in back up with Death Strike. The problem for DK has always been that eventually it hits a critical mass of incoming damage, the hits are too big, and you just die. It's kind of like filling up a balloon. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it pops. You can't heal through being hit from full to dead in a single shot. Because of DK's excellent self-healing, which is better now than ever before, Blood DKs are in really good shape as long as that bubble doesn't burst, but this nerf makes it so that the bubble bursts 10% faster now. This can't be underappreciated. It's a bad change for DKs. I still think DK is a good tank, although they are very complicated. This just cuts them down quite a bit at the higher end. If you're not pushing the class to its full limit, so like if you're doing weekly 15s and you're pretty comfortable with that, I think this is a complete non-change for DKs, to be honest. So I think it's like bad for progression rating for DK, probably. I think it's bad for like the highest level of Mythic Plus pushing for DKs, and that tends to have trickle-down effects in terms of what people are willing to play in a little more casual content. But I think on average, DK probably comes out of this exactly the same as they went in relative to all the other tanks. But it's something to bear in mind. Now let's go over warriors, and they're the class that's by far the tankiest in the game. It's not remotely comparable. Honestly, Blizzard could have thrown this nerf just at warriors, and I think it would have been good for game balance. Instead, what they've done is indirectly buff warriors by a really huge margin. So as you can see in the patch notes here, I'll even scale them up. Vanguard no longer reduces damage taken. Vanguard is the warrior damage reduction passive, and it gives you your stamina and armor and whatever. What does it do? It gives you a 5% damage reduction buff as a warrior, so that's been removed, so that's a 5% nerf. And then defensive stance only will reduce damage taken by 15%, down from 20%. These add up to a 10% damage reduction nerf, right? Same as everybody else? Well, no. Warrior is so tanky that it really doesn't need to stay in defensive stance most of the time under normal circumstances. I did raid testing in defensive stance out of an overabundance of caution, but it wasn't necessary. I was basically at full health the whole time. Swapping in and out of defensive stance and battle stance in Dragonflight is not like swapping in and out of defensive stance in like classic WoW. You don't get crit and then immediately die. You just lose a 15% damage reduction buff. It also is a 10% damage dealing reduction debuff. If you're not in danger, there's no reason to stay in defensive stance permanently. You can go into battle stance and treat defensive stance more like a defensive cooldown that you can turn on whenever you like without any limits. Blizzard clearly thinks that warriors tank a defensive stance all the time, which they just don't. They had played around with making defensive stance not penalize protection warriors' damage at one point during the beta, and this was a very welcome change. There's something really unsettling, just wrong, about being a protection warrior and not staying in defensive stance. But a couple of weeks after they made that buff, they randomly changed it back and never mentioned it again. So because of this set of changes, warrior got a massive indirect nerf. No, a massive indirect buff. Every other tank takes 10% more damage now. Technically 11%, but whatever. Warrior takes 11% more too when they're in defensive stance, but that's not the default most of the time. Under normal circumstances, warrior's gonna be tanking in battle stance and only taking 5.3% more damage. That's a ridiculous buff to what is already the tankiest class in the game. So let's just sum up some thoughts here. Last week, Blizzard increased Brewmaster's health by 11.5%, which was a great buff that gave Brewmaster monks a lot more breathing room and would have made them a lot safer and closer to the rest of the pack in terms of their defensive capabilities in Mythic Plus. They also buffed Paladin by like 3.5% more health and 3.5% more damage reduction from armor, so about 7%, a little bit more tankiness in Mythic Plus as well. This week they plan to increase both of these classes and all of the classes damage taken by 11%, which basically cancels out those previous buffs. So like, what was the point? I guess they're closer to the pack, but they're still just as bad as they were before the buffs. Pally's worse. It's hard to look at this set of blanket nerfs to all the classes and feel like Blizzard has a plan for tanks. It really feels like this set of nerfs was done by a completely different person from the person who made the decision to buff those two outlying weaker tanks last week. Where it gets even more confusing for me is when you look at warriors, who are now even further out in front of the rest of the pack as the tankiest tank in the game, no question. Even if you're a protection warrior who's in danger and you're tanking a defensive stance, you haven't lost any ground on the other tanks at all, despite being literally 1.5, 2, 3, 5 times tankier than the rest of the competition. It doesn't really make any sense. And at this point, we're 2 days out from the raid release, so sure, Blizzard could go back on these changes or make more targeted nerfs in the 23rd hour, and I think they should, but there's not a lot of time left to do it. I realize this seems like a bit of a downer, so I want to end on a positive note here. First off, I think most of the tanks are still in really good shape, like that opening paragraph where they say, we want tanks to enjoy playing the game. We think that players are enjoying it. Like, yeah, that's true. We are. It's a good time to be a tank right now, even with these nerfs. While Monk is definitely weaker now as a result of this change, they're still very fun to play. And I'm willing to believe that Blizzard will realize what a horrible mistake they've made here and eventually bring Monks closer to the rest of the pack. As for the other tanks, with the exception of Warrior, I think they're all very well balanced defensively. They have different play styles, very different defensive toolkits, and they all get the job done in different ways, but they can all pretty much handle anything the game has to throw at them. I think that's great. I think that is the platonic ideal of what tanks should be, right? Different toolkits, different ways of handling the jobs, but all basically still capable of having the same end result of tanking stuff and staying alive. I still think Druids stand out as incredibly good tanks in terms of their group utility and damage, and that kind of vaults them a little bit ahead of basically the non-warrior tanks. They are more likely, I think, than any other tank to come out of all of this in really good shape. But defensively, I think they're just a super strong tank, not actually overpowered. Warrior is the tank that I think is clearly overpowered defensively. I don't think you could argue otherwise. And now Warrior's even better. Proportionally speaking. I mean, they did just get nerfed, but proportionally speaking, Warrior just got like a relative 5% buff on the rest of the pack. This is great news for Warrior mains, or for anybody who just likes hitting Thunderclap and Revenge. All right, that's it. This certainly won't be the last set of tank changes Blizzard makes. We'll cover those once Blizzard gets to them. Maybe there will be something in the next 24 hours. Who knows? Thanks for watching. Bye.